Thank you for listening to Pleasant Grove Baptist Church Sermon Audio. For more information, please visit our website, pgbcronda.com, or visit on all social media platforms.
That's good, wasn't it? Man. Well, with a song like that, you can't help but think we're probably going to open to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 right here. So if you want to grab your Bible and make your way over there, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, looking at verses 1 through 15. And while you turn, it's good to be up here with y'all, and appreciate James giving me the opportunity to share. And like Michaela said, we've been a little bit everywhere, and it's been wonderful to, especially over the last 6 months, get to go. I think we visited either 7 or 8 different churches, and I just come in there and share God's message with them. And we've already got a couple more lined up after y'all, so just be praying for us and where the Lord leads us, and wherever that church may be. And anyway, but like I said, it's been really good. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, because I really want to get to what we're talking about this morning. And of course, it just makes sense. When the Lord led me to this, I thought, well, this is not exactly, doesn't have to deal with the time, but at the same time, this is a very timely message. And if you're familiar with Ecclesiastes, especially this chapter right here, we know it's the famous time passage, right? And so King Solomon and all of his wisdom, and of course, just to give just a short intro to Ecclesiastes here, it's part of what we would call wisdom literature. Of course, I think James said earlier, Solomon, when he took over Israel's throne, he was very young, right? And so he asked God for wisdom, and God granted that to him. And so, and with that, Solomon became the wealthiest man in all of the world. He was the wisest man. He was powerful. And so right here, when you look at Solomon's works, you got Proverbs on one hand, and I'll just use these two to kind of counterbalance each other. You got Proverbs, which is Solomon, and he's talking like a father to his son, right? He's saying, listen, son, if you will go out here and you will do these things, then guess what? Life is going to be good. You think these things will happen. It'll be okay. When we look at Ecclesiastes, and maybe this isn't the message you wanted this morning, but Solomon is an older man, and he's looking back on life. And so because of that, there was moments where he fell away from God, because he let that wisdom, he enjoyed the fruits of it, right? And he enjoyed them so much he made them idols. And because of that, now he's an older man when we find him in Ecclesiastes, and he's looking back, and he's going, look, I have tried to fill this empty void in my life with everything, and it didn't work out for me. And I'm trying to warn you right now so that you don't have the same scars that I do. Right? I mean, that's what Solomon is getting at. Ecclesiastes takes a much more pessimistic tone. He's like, I've seen what has happened. I've seen everything that there is, and so I want to give you some advice so you don't make the same mistakes I do. But when we come to this passage here, I just have to think about the fact that here it is. It's December 29th, right? Right, okay. Just making sure I got my days right. It's like that weird time between Christmas and New Year's, and you don't know what day it is, right? But that's it. Here we are. It's 2024, and so this is a time when we gather with loved ones, and we like to reflect, right? We like to reflect on the year that we've had, and we do that with loved ones. Sometimes we try to pass on some wisdom and advice while we're around our nieces, nephews, grandsons, and what have you, and that's it. We think about the people we've lost, right? We spend time reflecting on that. We reflect on the new births, the new life that has been given to us, the new relationships, the graduation that took place, the wedding that took place, right? But also the financial struggles, the sickness, and all of that. And we think about what has happened over 2024, right? What has happened to us. And right now we're making plans for 2025, right? In other words, not only are we reflecting on the past, but we're looking to the future. And with that, so, we're thinking, we're making plans right now, right? How can I make 2025 be the best year, right? How can I make 2025 have meaning? You know, when we think about 2024, we look back and we ask ourselves, what made me feel like I spent my time well, right? What is it that made me feel like I took and spent that year well? And what is it in 2025 that I'm going to do, right? What am I planning so that when I look back and I can reflect, that, you know, I look and I say, you know, that was time well spent. That was, you know, because time is such a precious thing that we can never get back, and we don't know how much we have, and so it is extremely valuable to us. And so that's what we're looking at this morning as we approach this. And if you will, we'll stand for the reading of God's Word right here. So we're going to be reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. And it says this, very familiar, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh, that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, excuse me. Also, he hath set the world in their hearts, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it, and God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that it which is past. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I just ask right now, Lord, that you would just help us this morning to hear your word, hear your message, Lord. Just let me be the vessel for you, Father, and Lord, just let you get all the glory for all that is done. In Jesus' name, amen. And so right here, again, we see King Solomon, and so he is reflecting back on his life right here as an older king. You know, he's come near the end, and so we see that he takes on this message right here of, hey, let me pass on some advice to you while you still have time, so that you can make your time meaningful. And so as we think about this morning, I want to give you something to think about, something I want you to ask yourself, and that is, you know, what gives your life meaning and purpose? In the year 2024, what is it, when you look back, what is it that you say gave my life meaning and purpose? Why did I get up every morning and do the things that I did, right? What is going to feel like it's going to give me purpose in 2025? What makes you feel like your time has counted for something? And so with that, I just got through reading right there, but look back at verse 1 with me right here. It says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. And you know, when you read that verse, you're like, well, that sounds pretty good, right? Like, man, you know, maybe you got a coffee cup for Christmas. That might be something you want to stamp on it, right? And read that every morning. That's good stuff. And this morning I could not get this out of my head. When you think about this passage of Scripture, maybe you got the tune playing in your head of the Byrds, right? That 1960s hit, there's a season to everything. And now I got to preach this, because if I don't, I won't ever get all of this out of my head now. I got to go play that song after the service so I can get rid of it. But if you're familiar with the song, it's very optimistic, right? It's a very upbeat, it's a very happy song. And so, it sounds really swell, and that's the thing. It doesn't do justice to the pessimism that Solomon is bringing right here. And we just need to back up, and I'm just going to really briefly recap what chapters 1 and 2 of Ecclesiastes is all about, because if you go back to chapter 1, you'll understand where Solomon is coming from. And just to sum it up this way, Solomon simply says that there is a profitless and endless cycle to nature. In other words, he says, guess what? The sun goes up and the sun comes down. It rains, the sun dries it up. The rivers, they never fill up the oceans. It's just one big, endless, monotonous, profitless cycle. In other words, things just go on and on and on, and nothing is accomplished. And then after that, he says, here it is. He asks God specifically for wisdom, and then he even goes as far to say as that the wisdom that he has been given has given him sorrow. It has made him sorrowful. And then in chapter 2, he goes on to tell how he allowed himself to experience all the pleasures of the world, right? Because with that wisdom, many people came to Solomon. He had elaborate parties. He had all the pleasurable company in the world he could want. He had all the food and the drink. He had everything that you could think of, all the wealth that anybody could have. And then he sits there and he says that none of that satisfied him. None of it, right? He indulged in everything there was, and yet was not satisfied with what there was in life. And when you think about some of the stars, the celebrities, these people who have a lot of money out here in the world, and you just turn on some entertainment news network, right? And all you hear about is just how miserable their lives are, right? And what's going wrong in their world. And so right here, then Solomon, he proceeds to say that, living wisely is foolish. You know why? Because the wise man's going to die just like the fool, and in the end, nobody's going to remember who was what. I mean, that's it. He's playing hardball with us right here. And so right here, he also says that he talks about the foolishness of work, because no matter, what he's accomplished, remember, he built great buildings. He had magnificent structures. He says, it doesn't matter, how much a person works and how much they accumulate, because guess what? In the end, someone else is going to end up with it. Right? You did all that work, you spent all your life, you did all these things, and at the end, you barely get to enjoy it. Somebody else is going to get to enjoy the spoils of what you then. And so then right here, and this whole time he uses this one word to describe what he describes life as, and he goes vanity of vanities, and he says that constantly through chapters 1 and 2, and when we think about vain things, or somebody being vain, it doesn't really capture the definition well of what Solomon is trying to say right here. What Solomon is saying when he says vanity is it's something that is temporal, something that it's like a mist, right? It is here one moment, it is gone the next. And you think about our lives right now, compared to the eternity of God, we are just but a breath, right? We are very temporal. And that's it. That's what he's saying is all of this world, it is just so temporal, so finite, and that's it. So all that we do, it's just meaningless. I mean, that's exactly what he's saying. It is so temporal. And then right here we get to chapter 3, and then Solomon gives this poem. And we find this poem in chapter 3 about the times and moments in our life. And I'm not going to read the whole poem back to you for time's sake right here, but here's what I want you to understand. I will read just a couple of them right here. If you look like at verse 2, it says, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. And right here, what Solomon is doing is he's actually using a poetic device to get our attention, right? Because here's the important part when you read that list. You notice they're opposites, right? And so and you don't have to be a great mathematician to figure out if I add 14 of something and I subtract 14 of something, what do I end up with? Absolutely nothing, right? I end up with absolutely nothing. And that's what Solomon is saying. Guess what? The times in our lives, I add up to absolutely nothing. And then to add insult to injury right here, in verses 9 and 10, Solomon basically reinforces what he said in chapter 1 right here. He says, "What profit hath he that worketh, that wherein he laboreth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised." And so right there he says, it's all busy work. Right? He says it's just all monotonous. It is all busy work. And so he gives the same negative evaluation of human activity as he did to those profitless cycles of nature, right? He just says, guess what? We're just here and we're just spinning our wheels and there's nothing to it. There's absolutely nothing to life that I have found. It does get better, y'all. But right here, and that's the whole point, is building up to this moment, though, Solomon has basically described life, and we need to understand that there's something very important. Solomon hasn't mentioned someone at all while he's been doing all this, right? There's someone that Solomon has not mentioned at all this time. When Solomon is speaking, he is speaking as a sinful, fallen human, right? Like we all are, and he is indulged in the pleasures of this world, and he's saying, it hasn't brought me happiness. It hasn't brought me the desires. It hasn't done what I thought that it would do for me, right? And I just look around at life, and I just feel like I'm just spinning my wheels, and nothing great or meaningful is going to happen. But look at verse 11 right here. And this is where we pick up. And we're going to spend some time in verse 11. It says, "He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end." And we're going to break this verse right here into three parts. But just look at that very first line right there. It says, "He hath made everything beautiful in his time." Who is he? Who has been missing up to this point in the Scripture? God. Solomon has not mentioned God not once from chapter 1 all the way till now. And then right here he says, God has made everything beautiful in its own time. And so right here, it's important for us to understand that up until this point, Solomon has been examining life not with God, but without God, right? In other words, just as a sinful human, just in the world. And so he has not mentioned God at all, but he says, he hath made everything beautiful in his own time. And so, and Solomon in chapter 1 and 2, he used this phrase of living life under the sun, right? In other words, you'll see that a lot. He'll say, I live life under the sun. And it's important for us to understand that this word or this phrase right here, it was also used by what we would call skeptics. They didn't believe, the pagans of that day, they didn't believe that there was, that the world just kept going. In other words, it was eternal. They believed that the world would just, keep going in cycles. And when you think about all other religions, right? I mean, that's it. It's all one big vicious cycle. Certain religions, if you ascribe to those, then you believe that, look, you're going to be born a servant or a slave or, somebody who works at McDonald's, and, you'll become reincarnate into something else that's just as pathetic in the next life, right? I mean, that's it. In other words, you'll never improve your stature. You'll just be in this vicious cycle of coming back as something that is, or if you were born really great, guess what? Then you just get to continue. But it's a vicious cycle. Nothing is accomplished. Nothing happens. And so right here, he describes, this is the view of the skeptics. But now on the other hand, though, as Christians, we know that the world is not eternal. That these vicious cycles that we are talking about haven't always been here, right? Because if you turn to the very front of your Bible, what's the first few words? In the beginning. In the beginning. The world we know has a beginning. Why? Because God created it. He decreed it from the beginning. In other words, God was outside of time and created the world, and because of that, there is time now. And because there is a beginning, we also know there's going to be an end, right? And so the world has not gone on forever, but actually there is a beginning. God is going to complete his work, and there will be an end. And so when you really boil it down, we see basically two views that come into play right here, talking about under heaven and under the sun, and that is this. On one view, and this is the way I'm going to describe this, I'm going to throw a word out at you, but you could describe it this way. It's called nihilism. You go, whoa, and I'm not going to make you spell it. But basically, it's like this. A nihilist, and I'll give you a great example. How many of us in here have ever seen the show Seinfeld? Or know what it's the premise of the show, right? It's a show about nothing, right? I mean, that was the whole premise of the sitcom. What made it funny, it took all the things, all the choices that we made in life, right? And what did Jerry and Elaine and George, what did they do? They showed us how silly, how trivial, right? How mundane, how unimportant everything was, right? And I didn't realize this till recently, but the producer of Seinfeld said that the only way that this show would ever go on is if none of the characters in the show ever learned a lesson. And when you think about that in the whole show, Lane was always having the troubles with the relationships. George was always having trouble at work. Nobody ever learned anything. And it's funny to watch, right? Me and you look back and we laugh. Now, it's not funny to take part in, and when we make those choices, we don't view them as trivial. We don't view them as monotonous. I mean, and that's the thing is, it's funny to see. It is not funny to live. And so the nihilists, though, they just say, life has no dignity. Life has no morality. Life has no meaning. In other words, every time you come back to it, you just, kind of like Solomon in the first 2 chapters, everything is just net zero, right? I mean, we're just spinning our wheels. The world keeps going on. There's a new day. There's nothing new. And that's, so when you look at either pagan religions, you look at atheists and agnostics who declare that they are God. I mean, that's it, is when man makes himself God and he's the one who is the judge and he's the determiner of righteousness and he's fallen, what righteousness can there be? What goodness can there be? None. But then there's the second view, under heaven, right? And right here, and that is the one of the Christian who serves the one true and living God, right? Yahweh. And the one who believes that because we do have a Creator, because we were created in God's image, we do have purpose. God has given our lives purpose. God has given our lives meaning. And that's it. God has given our lives, He has endowed us for His purposes and His own good will, right? In other words, God is the sum of our being and who we are. And so just knowing that because of God, we can be moral beings, right? In other words, God shows us what righteousness is because He is the standard. And we always fall short of that, but He says this is what you need to be, right? That's the whole point of the law, is to say, do these things. You're going to fail, but this is my standard. But it's God who gives us that and gives us meaning and shows us what we need to do. And so right here, Solomon's viewpoint has changed now. Instead of viewing life under the sun, he is viewing life under heaven. He's saying, God has given my life meaning right here. And then right here, notice in the very first 8 verses, there's and I know James has said this probably too before, but repeated words are important words. And when we look at verses 1 through 8, the word time, it shows up 15 times. The word time. So right here, when we look at the word time, that should get our attention. And if you go to the Greeks use 2 different words to describe time. One of those words is chronos, and many of us we can probably understand chronos because it sounds like chronology, which is exactly what it means. In other words, it was the Greeks' way of describing linear time, right? In other words, this service has a beginning and it's going to have an end, right? Today is Sunday, tomorrow's going to be Monday. Weeks turn into months that turn into years. In other words, it's linear. All things run in a line. And so we see that word chronos, but that's not really the word that Solomon is using here when he's describing these events and he's talking about time. He's using a different Greek word, and that is kairos. Kairos. And what that is it means not a linear time, but an appointed time. In other words, the right time. A time for certain things in our lives to happen. So you see right here, God is not just some cruel and vicious clockmaster who one day just decided to create the world and wind it up and just turn it loose and say, you know what? We'll just see what happens, right? But instead, God has appointed times in our lives, and God comes to us outside of time into our lives intimately because we are His. We are His creation. He knows the number of hairs on our head. He loves us. And because of that, He actually meets us in time, right? And He appoints the times. And you think back right now, think back to what you endured and what you celebrated in 2024, right? Those times. The times of loss. The times of celebration, right? When we think about what's going to happen in 2025, we don't know what our highs and lows are going to be, but what we need to understand is that God has appointed the times. We don't know what that is, but God has appointed the times. It is a show of God's sovereignty. God has appointed these times, and why does He do this? To mold us, right? To test us. To grow us, to chasten us back to Him. And that is it. So when we look right here, there are, and I can tell you personally, 2024, at the very beginning of it, not my year. Not my year at all. I tell you what, I was like, 2023 I felt like the worst year I could possibly endure, and I was like, it can't get any worse than this. And of course, then it did. But at the same time, I look back on 2024, and I'm going to tell you something. God worked a miracle in mine and Michaela's life. And we're going to have a child. And it's going to be wonderful. And so, there's a lot to celebrate. And God has appointed a time for all things, And so that's, when we look at this, we need to understand that whatever it is that's going to happen or has happened, whether it was you graduating from school or getting a raise or the loss of a loved one or a friend, God has appointed these times. And right here, Romans 8:28, Paul, he says it this way. He says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. And so, of course, that's it. That should comfort us, that God has appointed these times in our lives, and that these times, these moments that me and you experience are meant for God's glory. They are meant to glorify Him. They are meant to grow us into His people. And so, when we look at the first part of the verse, we understand that, when we look at verse 11 right here, we understand that God is eternal. He is outside of time, and yet He meets us, His creation, in time. And the best way I can point to this is this right here. There is no better example of God meeting me and you in time than when He sent His Son Jesus. Borrowing from Galatians 4, it says that it is God who in the fullness of time sent forth His Son Jesus to redeem us, that we may be received as sons and daughters of the King. When we think about history, the whole Old Testament, all it does is it points to Christ and says, this right here, this is God's plan right here, Christ, right? That He should come in a body of flesh, that He should be crucified and mocked and ridiculed, and that He should rise on the third day. Why? To restore His creation, right? To restore God's people to Him, to restore all that He made and make it good again. Remember, up in the early part, Solomon, it was, everything was doom and gloom. Right here, real quickly, it says, look at the second part of verse 11. It says, also, He has set the world in their heart, And right here, a better translation of world would be eternity. In other words, he has set eternity in their hearts. In other words, we as humans, whether we know or believe in God, we have a longing desire to have purpose in our hearts. And that's why I asked you, what is it that gave your life meaning in 2024? We long to have purpose. And you see people who are so depressed these days, and they're searching so hard to have meaning in their life, and they don't understand why they can't find it. And it's because just like Solomon, they have grabbed onto something else in this world, some other, you pick it, an identity in materials, an identity in politics, an identity in something else instead of Christ. And because of that, they're running out of time. They're squandering their time. And right now, they're condemned by time to an eternity of hell lest they turn back to Jesus. And so that's the urgency that we should have this morning, is to reach those who are in that state, right? Because again, Christ met us in time. And so right here, what I'm getting to is Solomon at the very beginning, he says, life means nothing. But then he comes in verse 11 and he tells us, because of God, life means everything. Everything in life has meaning, because God has given our lives meaning. Right here in Matthew 12:36, Jesus says this. He says, "But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof in the day of judgment." So everything in our lives has meaning. There's nothing that's trivial. There's nothing that's trivial. It's not a Seinfeld world, okay? And so right here, as Paul says in Ephesians 5:16, how are me and you to respond to this? He says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Me and you, we don't know how much time that we have. We don't know what the time that we've been given, and we don't know when it'll be up. But Christ in John chapter 15 describes it this way, right? He says that I am the true vine, and you are the branches, and you will produce fruit. In other words, if you are connected to me, right, if you have the Holy Spirit in you, if you have the life of Christ in you, then you are my branches and you will produce fruit. Why? Because that's what a branch does on a vine. It produces fruit. In other words, church, we will go out and we will make disciples. We will help bear each other's burdens. We will pray for one another. We will pray for the lost that are out there, and we will try to bring them here so that they also, too, can know that Christ is Lord. And that's it, is we should redeem the time because it is evil. Right here, last part of verse 11, it says, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from beginning to end. And so just right here we see that God, of course, is an infinite being, and of course, we are not, right? There's no way that we can know everything there is to know about God. There's no way that we can know everything there is to know about this world. And so, right here, we have been made, and we understand, we desire something that is beyond this world, right? That's why people search for meaning, is we know we were designed and created for a place beyond this world. And so, right here, he says they have put eternity in their heart. And this is the most humbling part of the passage to me, because I think we as people, when we look around, right, what do we try to do? We like to be in control, don't we? We want to control our own destinies, don't we? What do we do to have that control? We save up for retirement because we want to be in control of our future, right? That's important. We get a job with benefits and insurance because we want to be in control of our present, right? That's how we have control. And right here Solomon is saying, God is in control. He has appointed the times. Me and you don't know if we're going to be sick or healthy or well or despondent in the next year. We have no idea. He's saying God is sovereign over all, and control is just an illusion. Control is just an illusion. God has all control. Right? When man declares himself God, atheism is the peak of this heresy. When God declares himself, or man declares himself God, he's saying, I am God, I know better than all. I make my own decisions. That right there. you can't find something more opposite, right? I mean that's it. Is God is sovereign, and we need to understand that, He has appointed the times in our lives. And real quickly right here, verses 12 and 13, I'm just going to summarize, but Solomon right here is just simply saying that although we cannot know all there is about God's grand plan for our lives, we should enjoy the fruits of our labor. Why? Because it's a gift from God. It's a gift. In other words, hey, look, you work hard, right? Enjoy the fruits. Rest, right? Have that birthday party. Go on that vacation. Celebrate that graduation or marriage, because in this life, it is a gift, right? Of all the fallenness in the world from our toil, it is a gift to celebrate, and it is a gift from God to enjoy those things. And then right here, look at verse 14 with me, and it says, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before Him. And right here, verse 14, it answers the question that all of us, even adults, we all ask with childlike wonder. Why? Right? That's what we all want to know. Why? Why, God? Why am I here? Why are these things in my life happening to me? And it's simple. To draw us closer to God. To make us dependent on Him, that we would seek His face, that we would seek the face of His Son, and understand that, there's no way that we can gain our own righteousness. It's only through Christ that we have any, and it is Christ that provides the way of salvation, so that we can be His sons and daughters. And as we close this morning, I just hope that as you plan for 2025, church, I don't know what this church will go through in the coming months, but I know this: God has appointed the times for this church. I've went around to many churches, and I'll tell you, most of them are in a lot worse shape in some ways. Not always, but some ways. I think 4 out of the 8 churches we visited didn't even have a choir. We went and I preached in the church, didn't even have a piano. We we sang a cappella, and that's all there was. And so I'm just saying here, church, as we think about 2025, God has appointed times not only for the people of this church, but God has appointed a time for this church and what its work is and what it is to do. Are you going to make the most of your time? Are you going to do it for the Lord? And I would just pray that, if you have not found Christ in 2024, I would just pray that the Holy Spirit would just beckon your heart for 2025. That you would just know who Christ is, that you would serve and love Him. And so right now, we'll just have a time for you to respond this morning as you see fit. And it's just been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you again for taking your time to listen to the sermon audio of Pleasant Grove. Please subscribe to get our latest sermons each week.